Near the beginning of this year, Global Game Jam happened and I made a game with GB Studio. Something about that experience made me yearn for more, so I decided to make another game with it. This new game is Tur, Hunger, Pain and Monsters. It's a dungeon crawling RPG. Tur is the Irish Gaelic word for tower. It seemed appropriate considering you spend the time climbing up floors. So, what led to its creation? Last year, 2024, there was an anime called Dungeon Meshi, adapted from the manga of the same name, created by Ryoko Kui. Studio Trigger animated it. It's about a small band of adventurers traversing a dungeon to save their friend, and eating the monsters they defeat as they're pressed for time and can't afford to travel back to town to stock up. They frequently worry about starvation and resources. Also last year, Dragon's Dogma 2 came out and was a bit disappointing. While I was playing it, I was thinking about all the monsters and odd magical side effects that the characters deal with in Dungeon Meshi, and wondering how much more interesting it would be if I was playing a game about that. Sorry, Capcom. But I did enjoy the camping mechanics, with the cooking providing bonuses and such. But for both of them, the core idea of maintaining a balance between exploring a dungeon, fighting enemies, eating, and resting is something that I thought could work well as a game. So that's the base of the idea I started with. Here's the outline of the game so far. The player starts by inputting their name and choosing their class. They start at floor 1 and work their way up. As they move around the levels, random encounters will occur. These lead to a turn-based battle screen. Upon winning the battle, they receive gold. If the player character dies in battle, the game is over. As the player moves around the map screen, they consume stamina. Once stamina runs out, they start getting hungry and tired at an accelerated rate. Once their stomach is empty, tiredness grows even faster. After they hit a certain level of fatigue, they pass out in the dungeon and the game ends. Periodically, there will be camping sites where the player's party can rest. However, stamina will only regenerate if the player is sufficiently fed. Likewise for tiredness. You can only rest well on a full stomach after all. Alongside camps there are also shops. Here you can buy food and healing items. And while you're working your way through the floors, you might meet other adventurers. However, they're not always friendly. But it might need to be a risk you take, as when your party members die, they cannot be revived. That's about as much as I have working and/or planned, so let's move into the technical stuff mixed in with my opinions on GB Studio. When you make a level, you usually get a small selection of options to determine the type of level, such as a platformer, adventure, menu screen, etc. Unfortunately, a turn-based menu is not one of the options, but point and click serves as a decent base. For building the turn-based part of the equation, after looking into it, the most common method seemed to be using a loop in the level's initialization method. You manually fade into the level, and then set the loop after that. Inside that loop, that's where you set up the ordering of your menus and who's doing what. I set up a variable to organize turn order and make changes to the menus based on that. The player first lands on the main menu, they pick their option, that plays out, and then the turn order increments. When the turn order is on 4, which is the enemy turn, it will reset back to 1 after their attack. I also made it so, when the scene is loaded, it randomly picks between 1 and 4, changing the starter character each time. Well, I say random, but it doesn't quite work like that in GB Studio. You can manipulate it with inputs, but it's good enough for this purpose. After that, it became a matter of how to display text and numbers that update after each turn. Initially, I considered using actors to display numbers based on an example project I found. But that used one actor per digit, and that would quickly eat up the actor limit. I tried to get around it by creating actors with 3-digit number sprites, before realizing that I would need to manually set the sprite for every single number. After consulting with the GitHub page, it was suggested to me that I use tile replacement instead. I wasn't super knowledgeable on it at the time, but now it makes up a significant portion of the game's UI. Related to that, I also attempted to build my own menu system. I can't exactly remember why. I think I wanted to do something that regular menus kept pausing. But my own menu was updating all of the on-screen values every frame. This absolutely ruined performance, so I quickly reverted back to the default menu system. After all that mucking about, I got a basic turn-based system working, where the player's 3 characters could attack, and then the enemy would attack back. I'll delve deeper into skills and other systems a bit later. Next, I needed a level where random encounters would occur. Originally, I intended for the map screen to be procedurally generated. Unfortunately, it wasn't feasible. Tile restrictions, and the complicated aspect of setting up rules for generation, made it nigh on impossible to get working. I decided I'd rather have pre-made levels than spend months trying to work around the restrictions, so I built levels in Tiled instead. The map screen needs to provide an overview of the party's status, as well as information on stamina, hunger, and tiredness. It takes up quite a lot of space. As such, the actual playfield is a fraction of the screen size, meaning the maps are quite small. As for the stamina bar, there are 2 points, start and end, and 16 tiles between them. I take the stamina variable and divide that by 16, and then add 2 to give it the correct ending position. I have 2 loops. The first one fills up the stamina bar with full tiles, up until the point of the aforementioned ending position. Then, from that ending position to the last tile in the stamina bar, I replace them with empty bar sprites. The bad news is that I'm doing this every single time there's an input. I've made a mental note to improve the efficiency by changing where that code executes. On the subject of input, due to the map screen's various scripts being inside a loop inside of the scene's onInitialization function, I cannot use the attach script to button method for input. It simply does not work while encased in a loop. As such, I'm using if button held instead. This unfortunately comes with the side effect of increasing input delay by a considerable amount. It isn't a huge concern, as the movement is grid-based, going one step at a time. This is done to manage how much stamina is used each step, and to decrease the step counter that triggers the random encounters. With all that said, I may try and remove the loop in the onInitialization function, and change the input processes to use attach script to button instead. The loop causes more problems than solutions, especially in the case of events. I cannot use standard event triggers with my current system. Instead, I'm repeatedly checking the player's tile position to see whether they're on top of an event. It works, but it requires more setup than normal event triggers. Now, if that sounds like a lot of things to put into an initialization function, it is. It got so complicated, in fact, that I literally could not compile the game at one point. This was before I learned that I could save myself a lot of time and effort by using reusable scripts. They're quite crucial, as it turns out, and I'm annoyed at myself for not using them earlier. Everything I did up to this point had to be remade and shuffled into new scripts, but it cleaned up the code considerably. Now I could reuse code without the need to rewrite things in multiple places. However, there is one thing that bugs me about scripts: variable parameters. You can pass by both reference and by value. But should you try to adjust a variable's value with itself, for example, character mana equals character mana minus skill cost, you would need to use two parameter slots. Once for the reference of the variable, and then a second for its value, because parsing variables by reference does not actually provide their correct value. I figured this out after health and money values were being set to nonsensical values. It's not a big issue, but I've never had to use two parameters for one variable in any programming language I've used. Before getting into skills, I should mention enemy types. I have 20 enemies in the game and 8 different enemy types. Those types being generic, organic, oil, monster, angel, demon, human, and dragon. I needed a way of labeling each enemy and settled on using flags. Flags are basically a checkbox list that you can apply to each variable. Variables are 16-bit, so you get 16 flags. As you enable them, the variable's value will equal the binary solution of that 16-bit number. For example, ticking the first and second flag will set the variable to free, as the first two numbers in binary represent 1 and 2. If you ticked every box, you would get the value 65,535, provided it's an unsigned integer. So what I'm doing is setting up 8 flags and checking the number of the enemy type variable. With this, I can differentiate between enemies, and can now exploit their weaknesses using skills. There are 3 classes: Warrior, Mage, and Ranger. Warrior is a strongman type. They deal entirely in physical damage, but they also have a frenzy attack, a parry skill, and a 100% block, as opposed to the regular block, which only negates half damage. Mages can use magical skills. They're the only class that can exploit elemental weaknesses and heal other characters with MP. There are 5 elemental types: fire, ice, electric, dark, and light. Most enemy classes are weak to one or more of these elements. Some are also strong against some elements. Currently, magic is extremely overpowered compared to the MP cost. I'm trying to figure out a way of balancing it better. Finally, Ranger. They technically deal ranged damage, but it doesn't really matter much right now. In terms of skills, they have a high damage arrow attack, a dodge skill, and can steal money, and hopefully soon items, from enemies. Displaying these skills in the game ended up being the tricky part. GB Studio does not allow me to dynamically change the text on the menus. So I had to come up with an elaborate mess of code that checks the skill slot, checks the value of it, and then executes the code for that skill. That's why the skills menu only lists skills 1, 2, and 3, and you have to click through to see what you have. I'm currently looking into rewriting this system entirely, as it's both messy to maintain and visually not fit for purpose. Moving on, shops let you buy and sell items as previously mentioned. You can buy healing items, magic regen potions, and even stamina restoring items. You can also buy food to cook at camps. For this system to work, I needed 2 things: money and an inventory. Money is simple enough. It has its own variable that I can add to or remove from. But I did have to add cash rewards to the end of battle so that you actually had a way to get money. Inventory is also simple, but does take up more variables. Instead of going through the omni-shambles of code that I made for the skill system again, I decided to give each item its own variable slot. GB Studio gives me about 500 odd variable slots to play around with, so I don't need to be super conservative with them. Regardless, this now allows me to display a menu listing out each food item and how much of that item the player has. It's a basic system, but it does the job. I should point out that I use a different menu system from the default one. I use the Display Advanced Menu plugin from the GB Studio 4.1 plugin pack. It gives me more control over the positioning of text as well as where the cursor goes when navigating. It's quite a useful plugin, but it's a bit unwieldy when you have many items to display. Moving on to the camping scene, here the player can rest and cook food. The display provides a detailed overview of all the party members' statuses, as well as the party's overall hunger and tiredness. It's a bit cluttered, admittedly. I'll likely make changes to it in the future. Resting is probably the most important mechanic. It is the only way to improve strength, which is there in place of traditional level ups. Currently, strength is determined relative to the current floor number, plus or minus a set amount based on the party's current condition. If they're tired or hungry, their strength will go down. However, getting to a higher floor will always increase it somewhat. Camps are not going to be frequent, so it's going to be important to rest. As mentioned, resting primarily improves tiredness and refills stamina. However, how much fatigue is reduced is inversely proportional to how hungry you are. You can't rest well on an empty stomach after all. This is where food comes in. Eating food makes you less hungry. Being less hungry means you rest better. And the better you rest, the more stamina you refill. And more importantly, the stronger you will get due to a good work-rest balance. This is a core feature of the game, so it's going to change a lot over the course of development. The NPC recruitment system is not functional yet. How it should work is that you go up to an NPC event, and provided they don't attack, you will be given the option of recruiting them to the party. I'm planning on adding conditions to the process, such as having the NPC ask for money or a specific item. If you meet their requirements, you'll be able to recruit them. Before doing so, however, it would be wise to review their class and skills. This system is going to be complicated to implement, and at this current time, the only thing I've done on it is create a list of NPC names. Now for a few miscellaneous points. You might notice that the font is constantly changing. I'm working on finding a font that works well. What I'm struggling with are variable width fonts. It would allow me to fit more text into the text boxes, but the problem is that with the dark font and text boxes, there are noticeable white boxes in the text when using variable width font. After digging around online, I found the suggestion to change the background color to fix it. But that seemingly only works with color games, not with the original monochrome palette. If anyone does know how to fix it, please leave a comment below. I'm using active sprites to show emotes and attack animations during battle. It's a bit of a work in progress, but I think it's a positive addition to the visuals. I made some music for the game. Unfortunately, I'm nowhere near as talented as the Crazy Bus composer. But I did some research and looked up some chord patterns and messed around until I made something that was at least listenable. General sounds, on the other hand, are a mess. If you are playing the game in the browser, for the love of God, mute the tab. Otherwise, you will be bombarded with ear-piercing beeps. Emulating it on an external emulator or playing it on real hardware will do less physical and mental damage. However, it is still buggy. There seems to be a sound overlapping issue where parts of the music will stop when sound effects play. Also, the sound effects are heavily compressed and noticeably crackle. I did make most of the sound effects externally using BFXR, and then compressed them down to get them to work for GB Studio. Unfortunately, the emulator that they use for the engine and the web export just does not play nice with them at all. I have found an alternative way of making these sound effects, called FX Hammer, which will let me create sounds on real hardware or emulated hardware, and then take the save file and load it into GB Studio, and have it play back correctly. I did not get much feedback from the demo, but the majority of the complaints were about the repetitiveness of the gameplay and confusion around some of the UI elements. On that latter note, the hunger and tiredness meters were brought up as something that wasn't understood, so I may change how those look. Parrying and blocking were also points of contention because of assumptions of how they work. Blocking only blocks half damage. Parrying does not block damage, but it does reflect it back, which in hindsight might require a name change. And a super block blocks all damage. Battle UI is probably the last thing I want to mention. I think it could do with some improvement. A complaint I got on it was about displaying all of the party members' statuses, or pointing out how much health they have left when they get hit. I also want to change the turn order display and a few other things. A slight redesign is likely to happen. I could do with more feedback, so please go play the demo and leave a comment either here or on the game's page about anything you like or dislike. It will help me out a lot. As for future plans, the NPC recruitment is the big mechanic that wraps up all the core pieces of the game. Once that's in, everything beyond that is just refinement, improvement, and optimization. At least from a major mechanics point of view. A rewrite of the skill system is also on the table. As previously mentioned, it's awful to work with. Level-wise, there are 10 levels currently, not including the starting level, and I'm looking to get about 50 done. Which doesn't seem like a lot, but I should also point out that the game is meant to be a lot harder than it currently is. As for the release timeline, that's hard to say. I've been working on it since February of this year and progress has been rapid. However, I'm working on another game, and that one is my main project. This is the side project. I genuinely don't know when or if this project will be completed, but I will likely provide more frequent updates for this than Cyber Surfer, as development is swifter. That's it from me for now. Please look forward to the next video, whenever that is. It will either be another tutorial or a video on one of my older projects. As always, if you liked the video, consider subscribing. If you want to support me, you can do so from either Ko-fi or by purchasing something from my itch.io page. And if you want to ask me about anything or give me some feedback, feel free to leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.